What's going on, y'all? I am KMBest. He is Lambie Series, and I pointed the right way. Lambie, how are you doing today after the most impactful OTA I think I can remember since Zabu and Surfer got nerfed in the very first OTA? What are your thoughts?
This is definitely the most impactful OTA since the Zabu one. I can assure you. And normally after an OTA comes out, I stream and test stuff for like a few hours and I can come up with some very legit conclusions. But honestly, this OTA is so huge and so impactful that I feel like the only conclusion that I can really come up with will be discussed in a few topics time.
Yeah. So let's start with Niko Minoru, who I think I'm kind of glad to see these OTA changes happen. For those unaware, the major OTA changes, and this is not all of them, these are just the ones that are most relevant to the metagame. Elsa Bloodstone now gives 2 power, Loki is now a 4/5, the Collector is back to a 2/2, and Angela is a 2/2 that gets +1 for every unit. Those are the major metagame impacting ones right now, or at least the ones that seem directly aimed at the previous metagame. And I think I'm glad to see Niko Minoru in a new context because I was running her almost exclusively as the Elsa doubling machine. And when you have a card that is so far ahead of the rest of the metagame, like Elsa Bloodstone was, you kind of are forced into running Niko Minoru because one really easy way to win Elsa Bloodstone mirrors is to have 2 Elsa Bloodstones, and she is a card that lets you do that. And so I'm just glad to see what Niko Minoru can do outside of the context of like, oh man, I'm really forced to play this to win Elsa mirrors. So I'm excited for her. I think that I know 2 of the decks we're talking about today are going to be Niko Minoru decks. So I cannot wait to see what she can do. What are your thoughts on Niko right now?
So Niko Minoru is a really interesting card. Like personally, I always thought even before she released that she'd be a good card, but she's good in a different way than I expected. So firstly, when you mentioned the doubling effect, the one that lets you copy Elsa, copy collectors, copy like even your Kitty Pride. Actually, that to me is the most impactful effect like in general. Yeah. It's crazy strong, especially in things like Loki. Even in Thanos, if you play Niko, you can copy like a time stone also, right? It's a lot of stuff. The funny thing is the draw 2 effect. Outside of in a specific deck, I feel it's actually very bait because every time I play that draw 2 effect, like in a Loki deck, half the time I wish I didn't explode my card because I needed the slot to be filled, so Elsa buffs the next thing anyway. Yeah, so it's very weird because like Marvel Snap is a 6-turn game, right? So like destroying one thing to draw 2 means like you wasted 1 energy not putting something on board, and it mattered so much when I tested it. So the draw 2 effect is weirdly not that great. But yeah, the doubling effect is great. The one thing I really like also is the one that doubles. Well, I wouldn't say double. It's more like adds power to the Niko Minoru. With Elsa, it's actually add plus double, which is like crazy. So it's like all these like hidden effects of Niko Minoru that weren't really hyped up were actually really strong.
I will say I was hyping up her copy ability. I was right about this one. Like I was hyping that up because like one of the things that I really learned from Tanjo, who's the current #1 ranked player and has been for like 2 months at this point, is the main thing that Loki does for you as an Elsa deck is get your opponent's Elsa. And then if you have 2 Elsas, it's just the best thing possible. And Niko Minoru does the same thing, right? And so that was like the main idea behind me, just like, I'm just going to slap her and everything that runs Elsa. Why wouldn't I, right? Because like mostly she's a 1/4, which is fine. Sometimes she's a card that puts other cards in your hand. And sometimes she just reads instantly win the game. When you copy your Elsa or you copy your Elsa to Jeff or whatever. Like it's just stupid. Everyone knows when there's a cloning vats game and you have Elsa, you snap. This is the same thing. You just get to put it in your deck, right? And I think Niko, that does strike me as her strongest ability, but what really strikes me is I think in this meta, she has no weak abilities. There are some that are worse than others, but there are just none that are like bad. Even the one that moves stuff has synergy with Elsa, because oh look, that's the 4th slot. I get the buff and then it moves out. I get to reuse it, right? And so, especially in a Thanos list, she's just like a free include, because Thanos is actually, outside of Pure Destroy, the deck that I think uses the destroy and draw 2 best, because Thanos is a deck that kind of clunks if it's not drawing a bunch of cards. The more cards you draw, the more likely you are to draw further cards. And so Niko is very good in that context, I think, even if you do end up sacrificing a little bit. Like being able to just like play a reality stone after a Niko and have that reality stone be drawing 3 cards is pretty unbelievable. So overall, though, Niko, for you, for me, I think she ends up below the truly elite, amazing, busted tier, where it's like old Elsa, old Loki were, things like that, and more in the secondary, like she's somewhere near Iron Lad kind of tier is sort of where I have her. What do you think?
Yeah, she's about Iron Lad tier, so maybe a 7.5 or 8 out of 10. One more effect that's actually, I think, the one that I really love is like you turn a reality stone, you turn an infinity stone into a demon. That's like a +5 stat. There's so much power, right? Like you can, I even did once, like I Aliyah somebody and it became a demon thereafter. It's like insane. So
it's very actually, good.
Niko is such a toolbox. So I think the card is good to pick up, not mandatory, but very good to pick up.
I think she's mandatory in something like Thanos and mandatory in something like Destroy, but probably not mandatory elsewhere unless the metagame gets super inbred on having multiple copies of one card again.
Yeah, she can actually be bad, right? There's like 7 effects, and I don't see a time in like Marvel Snap's history that any of these 7 will be completely trash. So like, I feel like she's always gonna be playable somehow.
She's quite good. Next up, the lesser discussed parts of the OTA. Lambie, you indicated to me that you kind of wanted to talk about Spectrum and Hellcow. So, Spectrum 6-7, Hellcow 4-8. What you got for me?
All right, let me just get the Hellcow one out of the way first because we just have to mention it a little bit.
Okay.
Hellcow at 4-8 does nothing. I mean, it's a 4-8, but I've seen so many people try to make like Hella work, but like to me, that extra 2 points on the cow doesn't do much. And in fact, running Hellcow makes you more likely to discard your Hella. So like, okay, so Hellcow at 4-8, great. It's a 4-8 cow. It's scary, but it's not useful. Spectrum, I think, is the big one that I want to talk about. So firstly, people were hyping Spectrum ongoing. I don't want to be super conclusive right now, but in my testing with ongoing Spectrum Thanos things, just play the normal one.
Yeah.
The normal one is probably better. I tried it and I felt like I was forcing myself to play Spectrum on 6, which wasn't good, right? But of course, it's a bit early and there's a good chance that some list comes out that actually abuses the effect well. But for now, not really. But I think the biggest thing about Spectrum, which I think maybe will be underlooked a little bit, it's Series 1 and Series 2 gamers will love this card now. Like, when you just start the game, this 6-7 ongoing buffer is insane, right? Like, no one really even remembers Onslaught after this in Series 1 and 2. Because, like, I mean, Spectrum is so good right now. In the early stages of the game, it's like the ultimate like end game card. Like when people are learning the game, they set up, play cards on curve, Spectrum, bam, everything gets stats. It's a very feels good card, I feel like, for Series 1 and Series 2. And I think that's like, I don't know if that's their intention, buffing a Series 1 and 2 card, but maybe it is because they did it for White Tiger.
They did mention
previously.
It. Yeah. Just in case you didn't read the notes, they did mention that like it should be a nice buff for early game players as well.
Right,
so they were clearly thinking about it. Yeah, she's like Series 2 Doctor Doom right now. Like she's just she's a great card for teaching the fundamentals of Marvel Snap, which in the sense of like you are benefiting from being able to spread your power out and target 3 lanes, like just basic stuff, right? She's great for that. And I think it's good that she exists for that. I do want to say, I think that Spectrum decks depend on one major factor for viability, and that is, are Armor and Cosmo relevant in the metagame, right? And I don't think it's even related to how much power the Spectrum deck outputs. It's related to how good Armor and Cosmo are, and if that is the best way for you to use Armor and Cosmo. So previously, like when you think about an Armor Cosmo deck, I like to think about like a deck that's just very hard to interact with. It puts a lot of points on the board, and you can't really do much about it. Previous examples of this are like old school Surfer used to be like that. Shuri used to be like that, where it was just, we have our preventing you from interacting package, and then we just do some points, right? And I don't think Spectrum ongoing gets to that level, but that is the situation in which it ends up being good. Like if Destroy picks up and Armor and Cosmo are suddenly incredible, well, then suddenly Spectrum ongoing might actually be a real deck, right? Like that's what I think is the real determinant of whether or not that deck is good.
I just thought of something very creepily scary, which I hope isn't really going to become meta, which is, do you realize that, okay, so Armor Cosmo, right? And then Mobius Luke Cage, all these nonsensical tech
Yes.
that is like they all work in the same spectrum deck. Isn't it scary if it becomes good? Because like it's literally playing all your tech on curve and then you buff with spectrum. It's a scary thought. Because if that ends up working, I feel like many wombo combo decks will just randomly die if this kind of simple curve and then spectrum deck just becomes on top, you know?
That sounds awesome to me.
It sounds
I love dumb guy Marvel Snap.
It does sound simple and awesome, but if it's too strong, I'm a bit scared because like no wombo combo deck will survive because you just go Armor, Cosmo, Mobius, Luke, bam, Spectrum, buff stats. Oh man, that's a scary thought.
It is that is the sort of thing, right? That deck has a lot more tools and relevant cards than it used to. It definitely does. But like the major issue it used to have was it just didn't do points enough, and it still kind of doesn't, right? Because you think about a deck like that, and the answer to how do you beat Shuri is like you 50-50 a Cosmo on the final turn. Like you just guess where the Taskmaster goes because you're probably not beating it on points. And it's like it's one of those situations where it's like, oh man, like anyone that actually just has a proactive game plan against you that does not get immediately hosed by that, it's kind of tough to beat them, I think.
Yeah. But that is such a great early game, early like series deck, right? Like just Armor, Cosmos, stuff, Spectrum.
Yeah.
That sounds very powerful. I would love that if I was just starting out the game.
Yes, absolutely. Next up, I think we both agree that the baseline best deck after the OTAs is Thanos. I even think we have the same list at this point. Like we are very much simpatico on like where Thanos is and what it should be doing right now. And a lot of that is just, okay, it's one of the main decks that didn't get nerfed. It was less reliant on Elsa than anything else. So I have two questions for you about Thanos, though. One, is Elsa still just a card we're running because she's just free? Like, we just run her even though we don't use her as well as some other decks, and it's just like, why would we ever not? And two, is Mobius cuttable now because Thanos' worst matchup was Loki? If you're seeing less Loki, you can talk about cutting Mobius.
Right. So, firstly, when it comes to, I want to talk about the Mobius one first, because at the end of the day, what Loki used to do, which was very scary if you didn't have Mobius versus Thanos, right? It's like, because your deck is all 5s. If they play Loki on 3, they get to do your Time Stone thing without the Time Stone. Essentially, they Professor X you on 4, they Dino on 4, and then they like Blue Marvel you on 5. It's like if you Mobius after they play Loki, they will already play their 5 on 4 and then the 5 on 5. It's like they steal your deck, but they play it earlier. And if you don't have Time Stone, you definitely cannot keep up. So I feel like there's a good chance we cut Mobius now from like Thanos decks because like the Loki deck doesn't snowball you that hard, and I feel like that's one of the main reasons why you even had Mobius in that matchup in the first place. And also another thing, you mentioned the whole Elsa thing. I think Elsa is still good in the deck simply because you usually end the game as a Thanos deck with at least 2 lanes completely full, right? Yeah. Because you play stones and then you play stuff. So like just the little buffs to your stones, especially in the Professor X lane with Jeff, it's also kind of useful. My question is that I'm not sure if Vision is as good as it used to be. Because like, I mean, obviously 5'10 is worse than 5'11, but if everybody's Vision is also 5'10, so maybe it's fine. But like, is there a better card we can play instead of Vision? That I'm not sure yet. But yeah, I do feel like because like if you use Elsa to buff little things multiple times, it's probably better than buffing one big 5/8, so it's possibly a bit worse, but I think not by much.
Yeah. Next up is a deck I think is probably being underrated right now, and that's because there's a game-breaking bug preventing it from really reaching its true potential. That is Niko Minoru Destroy. I know Emma has been playing it into the top 10 recently, and I am a big fan of it myself. I think it's probably the most natural home for Niko Minoru outside of Thanos, maybe even a little bit more natural, and I want to go over why. So first of all, obviously, Niko Minoru destroying a Deadpool is amazing when it draws you 2 cards. That's so damn good. A note, though, when you do that, your game will crash, and then you have to reconnect to the game. Every time it's happened to me, I've been able to reconnect, but that is an actual risk you're going to run. This happens anytime you destroy something with Niko's ability and there is a replacement effect. So Wolverine, it'll happen. X-23, it'll happen. anytime something other than them actually dying happens. And also, you should note, you will not draw the cards, just like, you know, if they armor you, your Arnim Zola, if they armor your Niko target, you won't draw the cards. But generally, that is like the obvious one. What's a little less obvious is that her Forge buff is obviously incredible in a deck that already plays Forge. Her copies are obviously incredible when you're making a gigantic Venom and you can then just copy that gigantic Venom, right? Like, there are a lot of situations in Destroy, even when you're not making a gigantic Venom, where just having a curve of guys that blow up other guys is really, really important, right? Even if it's just like a Carnage or whatever that you're cloning, it's like, you know, a 6-power Carnage, right? That's awesome. But what really matters is that you get to continually blow up your X-23 and your Deadpool. So the copy ability is also phenomenal in the deck because you are so reliant on getting, you know, I need to do this into this, into this, into this, into this. You want to be blowing up X-23 and Deadpool every turn, right? And being able to clone a guy that blows them up is very, very important. But even outside of that, you know, use the Forge ability on a Lady Deathstrike. That's pretty sick. Like, there's a lot of inbuilt synergy with a lot of Niko spells in the deck. One that doesn't have a lot of synergy, though, is the one that turns stuff into demons, because you are a Killmonger deck, and that is pretty depressing when you end up blowing up your own demon. It can be helpful, but running the risk of your own Killmonger, and you need to play Killmonger later to trigger something, it's tough to deal with. That said, Niko drawing cards, Niko adding power to your Lady Deathstrike, Niko copying your Carnages and Venoms, extremely, extremely powerful. As soon as they fix this bug, I think this deck is real.
Right, so this deck... Okay, so let's talk about Destroy in general. I've been a very big fan of Destroy, because I play a lot of Conquest, right? Destroy, let's just talk a bit about that first. In Conquest, Destroy is just insane because, like, you have a critical mass of locations that you see across, like, one match versus the same person. And, like, I always like to believe that Destroy's 13th card is actually the locations, because there's, like, so many locations that strictly benefit Destroy and don't benefit other locations, right? I'm not even going to name them. You guys probably already know what I'm talking about. But, like, yeah, Destroy has so many good locations. So it's actually a good deck in Conquest. And, of course, Niko Minoru, like you mentioned, it's like, Destroy is like that one deck that has, like, the most benefit from most of the Niko spells, right? Like Destroy used to not be able to run like a location changer thing. Like, now there's a sort... Yeah,
it has
like
the
a sort
best
of
one. It's the only one that works on Nowhere. The only one.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's sort of inbuilt. It doesn't always happen, but it's like sort of inbuilt. So I think it's actually really, really good for the Destroy deck, because, like I said, the Destroy deck is super tight, and, like, I stressed so hard about trying to fit Chavez in this deck before, and I couldn't, and I gave up, because I think it's actually better without Chavez, because every piece is super necessary. But of course, I want to throw the question back to you also, which is for this deck, now that we mentioned earlier that Mobius might be falling off a little bit potentially, do you think we can get Death back in there? Because I feel like so my take is that... Oh, okay, because some people don't run it.
No,
Death,
I'm already playing Death because I play Lady Deathstrike. So what we do with their Mobius is just blow it the fuck up. And then I can play Death again.
Okay, that works.
That's already how I approach this metagame. And Lady Deathstrike, by the way, like, she's awesome, especially with a second Forge in the deck in the form of, like, Niko's buff spell. Like, that is really good. Lady Deathstrike for 6, that was the original breakpoint that I think Brendan and I talked about, where it's like, if you're doing it for 6, she's killing so much. Think about, like, the move deck right now. Think about how much dies to a 6-power Lady Deathstrike. She can just wipe an entire lane, especially when people are focused on things like Luke Cage and, you know, Elsa Bloodstone and Mobius M. Mobius. Like, she wipes everything. She blows it up. Now that Angela doesn't scale high, she can even blow up Angela. Like, it is a very powerful play to make. And the real upside of a deck like this is that you get to do it on turn 4 thanks to X-23. And that's extremely strong as well. Because obviously the bigger she is, the more stuff she can hit, the better. But the earlier she goes, the more guaranteed she is to just hit stuff that is not bigger than her. And so between X-23, Forge, and Niko Minoru, you end up getting very relevant Lady Deathstrikes off a lot, which means, yes, we play Death again.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention also, because like Death is one of those cards that, like, if you are high rolling, it's like shortchanging yourself to not run Death, right? Because, like, at the end of the day, if you are constantly blowing up cards every turn, the Death is easily like, okay, if it's not 0-12, it's like what, 2-12, which is crazy, right? So I think, like, Death should be in this deck. Like, the major reason why I mentioned Mobius is because obviously Mobius doesn't let you play Death, but since there's the Lady Death Strike, and also obviously there's a good chance that Mobius is gonna see less play, I think Death is just like super, super strong. Do you run Taskmaster?
No, actually.
Okay, so that's
yeah. I don't run Taskmaster, which makes very specifically it makes X-23 much more important because your final turn now has to be 7 energy, right? It's like null plus Deadpool or null plus death or whatever, right? Like you kind of need to. This is why I was talking about how Niko Minoru copying your guys that blow stuff up is so important, because you kind of have to have one of them on turn 5, right? And if you want to use one early, you need to also have one for turn 5. Niko Minoru copying one, obviously it's a bunch of power, but really just making sure you have that turn 7 option is or turn 6, 7 energy option is kind of what I'm about right now. Also, of course, you can do other ridiculous bullshit with her, like copying your Deadpool or copying your X-23. That's pretty stupid, too.
It's super dumb, yeah.
Let's talk Elsa. So, Elsa Bloodstone is now no longer far and away the single best card in the game by a mile, and now she's just, what, top 5?
Top 5.
Where do you have her right now?
Top 5. Yeah, she's just straight up top 5, which is not a bad thing at all.
Yeah, okay. So we both agree, she's still good. You probably still build around her. Where the main concern for me lies is the overlap with Angela, because part of why Elsa was good is she fit with this already very powerful mid-range package, and Angela is, a lot weaker right now than she used to be. So where are you on Angela in Elsa decks and the overall package that dominated the metagame over the last couple of days?
Right, so I've tested it very extensively. Like, literally, I kept spamming Angela and like Elsa in a lot of different decks and seeing the outcome. Angela is so much worse. Like I mean, this is the Elsa topic, but we can't get away without talking about Angela. Like,
it's important.
Like the Angela is so much worse. Like, I literally did this comparison, right? And I actually did the math. And above average Angela, which means Angela on 2 into like filling up the Angela board space and then like playing Kitty multiple times, is still only about 2-7. It's like 2-7 is the above average scenario. It's not even average. Average, I get about 2-4, 2-5. It's a lot worse. Like, Angela, I feel like is, sadly, I mean, they released a new variant recently, sadly, but like they kicked Angela out of most decks. It's so sad because Angela is one of my favorite cards. But okay, enough about Angela. More about Elsa. I think Elsa is very interesting because, like we said, right, it was probably the best card in the game at 2/2+3. Now it's top 5 because, honestly, this card still gets like what, +8 stats every game minimum on average. It's like, it's like so sick. The card is like, it makes Kitty still a good card. It makes Jeff still a good card. It makes Vision okay, pretty good. It makes like all your low cost cards good, right? It's like when you buff a low cost card with Elsa, it's like double stats, like 100% stat increase, that kind of thing still. So I feel like Elsa, okay, at the end of the day, overall Elsa is worse, obviously, because it's now +2. But it's because across the board Elsa is worse. The only people that benefit from Elsa getting worse is the non-Elsa decks. So like Shuri, Sauron, what else is there? Destroy, like we mentioned above, probably like bumps up 0.5 tiers right there, with just because Elsa got worse. Thanos got better because it abused Elsa a lot worse than other decks. So I would say overall Elsa is definitely still a good card. You definitely still want Elsa in many decks, but I think the biggest winners here in this Elsa topic and in this upcoming metagame is the people that the decks that didn't originally play Elsa. They are rejoicing right now because it's not that Elsa is unplayable, it's just that their life is made a lot easier because Elsa is a bit more under control.
Let's talk about the tech cards that weren't nerfed in this patch. That's Mobius and Luke Cage. I mean, there's been plenty of complaining about how easily splashable they are. I would not be shocked if one of the predominant reactions to this patch, once people really digested it, was, damn, they hit everything but those cards. And I mean, God only knows what they have planned for the future. I would imagine those are the kind of cards that you don't change in OTAs, but again, what do I know, right? And the main thing that sticks with me is that, I mean, I have felt for a while that Mobius is just like a card I put in every deck because without it, you just still get run over by Loki. And I almost worry that people are going to stop putting him in decks, and that means that Loki's going to run wild everywhere. Like, we kind of forgot that he did that, right? Like, is Loki Mania about to run wild, brother?
Okay, so honestly, in my testing with Loki thus far, I call it still a tier 1 deck, but I feel like it's not like straight up like universally agreeable across the board that it's tier 1, because I feel like the play patterns with Loki change a little bit, right? Like you strictly only can Loki on turn 4, Angela is worse. Like, I think it takes a while for people to get used to the fact that Loki is probably still very good. So I think Mobius will leave the meta a little bit because people are underestimating Loki. And obviously, when Mobius leaves the meta a little bit, then then people start playing more Loki, and then Mobius comes back. It's like a vicious cycle. The Luke Cage is interesting, right? Because like we used to only be running Luke Cage for like things like Shadow King, which was also mainly targeted at like the Loki decks and to a certain
And
extent
Angela.
Bounce. And Angela very heavily, yeah. I think Luke Cage will also. I think both of these cards will drop in popularity because of like the Elsa buff not being as crazy as it used to be. Angela sort of potentially maybe disappearing from the meta. So these cards might really see a drop in play rate. Does that mean we get a high evolutionary wave back? I mean, it's everybody's favorite like simple deck, right? No Mobius, so wave is good again. No Luke, so Cyclops evolved is decent again. You never know. I mean, there are some high evo diehards out there that are very glad, will be glad if Mobius and Luke play rates drop. So it remains to be seen if that's the case.
We've alluded to this before, but the best configuration of Loki deck right now still seems to be a little bit up in the air. Where I'm at right now is my list with Niko, but instead of Angela, I'm just running the Collector again. And it's just like, all right, you know what? Fine, it'll be fine. That's fine. It's close enough, right? I do think that we still probably want to include things like Shang-Chi and various tech cards that like that slot will change depending on the meta, right? Like, you know, if there's a bunch of Destroyer running around, it could be Cosmo, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, right? But like, it's basically still the same concept where it's like, all right, we are aggressively putting points on the board. And then also sometimes we Loki you and you instantly die. And then also when we're not Lokiing you and you instantly die, we are playing a very fair, interactive Marvel Snap game where it's harder for you to interact with us than it is for us to interact with you. And Loki going to 4, I mean, it does hurt that. It definitely also, I think one thing that I underrated pain point is that a lot of the time in those old builds of the deck where you'd have Collector and you weren't as aggressively a Loki deck, he would be a turn 6 play alongside something else. It'd be like him plus like a Snow Guard card or something sometimes on turn 6, or like him plus a 2 plus a Kitty Pryde. And now you don't really get to do that. It's very much just like him plus one other thing. It's like him plus that Kitty Pryde or him plus that Jeff or whatever. It ends up being like that, right? And so that does hurt him, I think. But I do think just generally the thing he does is still extremely powerful. Like if you compare him to other 4/5s, look at something like Omega Red and tell me which effect is better, right? Like it's very clear that this is still a card that has a more impactful effect than anything else at his cost. He's just no longer, you know, very obviously incorrectly costed. Now he's actually, you know, oh, this is actually like, you know, I'm paying a little bit more than I should for 5 power because I want the effect, as opposed to at 3/5, you were getting good rate and a busted effect.
Yeah, I'm still very much a Loki stan, Loki fan, and the fact that I think Loki is still tier 1 just because like it's fundamentally very strong deck. In my testing, one thing I realized that it's a bit worse for the Loki deck right now, which is like an amalgamation and combination of all the nerfs of this OTA, which is you kind of really need to curve well now. Like if you draw the good cards one turn later, the compounding effect is huge, right? Because every single Elsa card buffed is 1 less now. Every single, if you still play Angela, card buff now is like 1 less now. And like Collector late, yeah, I mean you don't play Angela, but like I mean like at the end of the day, every single thing you buff is like 1 less if than the past. So like if you don't draw your hard carries, your good like cards on curve,
Yeah.
it's a lot worse, right? And like the simple fact that you cannot Loki on 3 versus certain decks, like versus Shuri Sauron, last time you used to Loki on 3, then you steal their Shuri, then you play
Or
their
Galactus, yeah.
or Galactus,
Or
yeah. Like
Thanos. Yeah, it happened a lot.
yes, and the Thanos one, which is huge, right? So I feel like you need to really curve well into your Loki on 4 or 5. If not, like you will be behind. Not saying that that's a horrible thing to an impossible thing to overcome, but I feel like Loki is working with a lot finer margins right now, which may deter some people from the deck. But I do think like I don't know what's the best build right now. So I'm doing like one cost cards and Falcon just to really abuse the collector thing, like how Swen did it in the
I
past
remember
as
that.
well. I have Cosmo right now just because I really respect the destroy thing. And like maybe Hela sometimes. But like I respect these crazy decks that's why I run Cosmo. So but I think Loki in general is still a solid deck. But I don't want to confidently say it's okay, obviously I can confidently say that it's worse than it was before.
Yes.
But like I do still think it's tier 1, and I maybe other people will see it as well. But currently, once again, like we mentioned earlier, I think Thanos is still the top dog. Loki might be second or third. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's still probably somewhere up there.
Here's the thing, right? Like my instinct is that Loki still has a good Thanos matchup. Like it's probably not as good as it used to be, which was like really good. Like I think a lot of people really underestimated just how bad Loki beat the hell out of Thanos. Like it is almost it is very impressive to me that Thanos was able to be a functional deck given how bad the Loki matchup was. Like it was really bad. And I guess I just don't know, especially with the Collector coming back in, which Collector was a good card against Thanos because it limited their options for Professor X lanes, right? You can't Professor X a Collector. You're just legally not allowed to do it. Like if you do that, you're going to die. And so like I guess my worry is like, okay, maybe Thanos might have a better matchup spread, but if it loses the head-to-head, how good can it actually be?
Yeah, I feel like okay, so this is one thing since you mentioned Professor X, right? The collector is like super OP at beating Professor X. So like I was flirting with the idea of like instead of Angela we play Bishop because I'm playing Falcon, right? So Falcon is Bishop is another card that like sort of beats those kind of locked lanes because it just scales upwards. I'm not sure on average how much Bishop stats are if you even draw it on turn 3 yet, but like it's something to really consider.
It was not good for me when I tried it. I have tried that before.
Probably
maybe it's the best option now, but it was not doing it for me at the time because there's just so much setup that you have to do. Like a lot of the time, like, yeah, the Bishop's going to be good, but like some of the time it was just like, do you know what I would really love is like, what if it was just a Polaris? Like literally just a 3/5, right? And like, that's a bad sign when I'm like, yo, Bishop, because your deck is just too busy on those early turns. And it makes you worse. Like you already have one card with the Collector that makes you a worse Elsa deck. And then Bishop also has to go in a separate lane. And then you're not triggering Elsa until turn 5. And it's just like, okay, I can't afford all of this at the same time, right? Like it's it's a very weird card. I get where you're coming from because like, yeah, losing Angela sucks, right? And it's a big loss there. But I can't get myself to Bishop place yet. I can't do it. Maybe you can. Finally, we have Darkhawk, a deck that I think both of us are a little bit middling on, but a deck that has traditionally been very good into Thanos. And so if Thanos is the #1 deck again, suddenly it's time to talk about Darkhawk again. Obviously, putting rocks into the Thanos deck, very, very powerful. Also, of course, I think most people look at this and think, oh, of course Darkhawk's good against Thanos. It's going to be really, really big. But that's not even why it's good. Darkhawk is good against Thanos because it's a mid-range deck that puts rocks in the deck, and Thanos needs to be continually cycling its cards for a good early game start, right? It's also good because it can run Killmonger. And so Thanos' general game plan is like, for 3 turns, I'm just playing stones. I'm playing stones and Niko Minoru, and that's it. And then I'm going to use the stones to Professor X you, right? Maybe I'll play a Jeff, a Daredevil, a Mobius alongside those stones on turn 3, a Psylocke, something that doesn't die to Killmonger. But if you get Killmongered, The rest of your game plan is you play a 5-drop on 4, a 5-drop on 5, and then a 5-drop on a 1-cost guy on 6. And that does not beat Darkhawk. Yeah, it just doesn't do it, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's honestly more the Killmonger and Disruption that wins the matchup into Thanos. Darkhawk being, enormous doesn't hurt, but Killmonger and Disruption has always been sort of the recipe for dealing with Thanos. Even when Thanos was broken, that was how you would try to combat it. And now it's a much more interesting proposition for Darkhawk because Thanos, like as good as it is, has not been focused on as the top deck because it has not been the top deck. And that means that if you want to focus on beating that deck, I kind of think it's pretty beatable. What are your thoughts on Darkhawk, Thanos generally, and how to match up into it?
So I thought about Darkhawk a little bit. Actually, my first instinct of thinking of Darkhawk was like Darkhawk Bounce because I just didn't want to give up on Bounce because there's like so many good cards that can technically synergize with like rock stuff, right? Like the Korg and maybe with bouncing a Widow and stuff like that. But yeah, no. At the end of the day, I tried multiple Darkhawk builds. The Bounce one, the straight up one with the Killmonger, and the OG one, even with Shadow King and stuff like that. Darkhawk is generally a very fair deck. I feel like it has that one big thing that solos the lane versus Thanos, which is Darkhawk. But then you have problem beating other things and other lanes. Because like at the end of the day, I feel like it's like Darkhawk one lane, then you hope to Shang-Chi a dinosaur in the other lane, that kind of thing. It doesn't always work. And it's so fair compared to like the early game of things, like even now still like Loki, right? Like even like Darkhawk is not a deck that uses Elsa very well for the most part. So I think like Loki early game will beat Darkhawk. Destroy probably as usual destroys Darkhawk because like the age-old thing whereby Destroy is so uninteractive when it comes to Darkhawk. Maybe if you run Cosmo it's a bit different, but like I think people will try this Darkhawk idea just because like it's very natural, like you said. Thanos goes up, people will think, oh, big deck, so big hawk. People will just think of it that way, and it's not wrong per se, but I don't know if any kind of build of Darkhawk can keep up with the consistency of like maybe the Loki stuff or like the Thanos just curving out really well with their stones and stuff like that, right? Because you got to think, right? Like if you're playing Darkhawk to beat a Thanos deck, is your Darkhawk deck able to beat anything else? Which is the biggest question, because I don't know if it can beat anything else consistently.
I mean, Man-Thing Darkhawk seems strong in that matchup. I can tell you that, right? Like Man-Thing, like that's a lane winner that doesn't die to Shang-Chi or Rogue, right? Like there's that, right?
Yeah.
Where you just like slam that guy down in a Thanos lane, and they're just like, everything I've invested in now hurts me.
Yes.
Your whole investment in this lane has been invalidated by the Man-Thing. But I don't think that's going to be the kind of card that really gets its shine unless a bunch of top players pick it up, because I just don't think a lot of people bought Man-Thing. But it's definitely like between Man-Thing and Killmonger, which again, sort of anti-synergy because, you want them there for one.
Yeah, you want that stuff on the
board. The other. Like, it does seem like Thanos is a very controllable matchup, right? Like, this is the most fair version of Thanos I think we've ever had. Like, I do not... if people want to beat the deck, they can beat the deck, right? Like if this thing ends up being like the number one deck for a while, I'm just going to guess that there's some other factor preventing the decks that beat it from reaching the top. And I think, it's pretty likely that factor might be Loki, but we'll see.
Yeah, I do think that this is a good direction we are going, because like what you literally mentioned, you literally said Thanos being the best deck is a very beatable best deck, which is good, right? Because having a beatable best deck means that your tournament meta, your ladder meta, your conquest meta is actually rather diverse. There's gonna be a ton of like viable things that maybe it's like if Thanos is like 51% versus most things, right? Then that means if you're a 49% deck versus Thanos, you could be doing decent in the other departments versus other decks as well. So like that means that it's very diverse, and I think it's gonna be a very interesting meta. At least I don't know whether Werewolf will shake things up too much, but like for the most part, at least this next week, I think we will have a lot of decks doing well on ladder, in conquest, and in tournaments, and I feel like that's something that should be quite exciting to behold.
With that, I have been KMBest. Lambie, you want to take us out?
That's KMBest and I'm Lambi Series, and this is another episode of 8 Cubes that will be on my channel this week. Subscribe and we will see you very soon.
Oh, it's gonna be on Spotify too. I'm getting back on the Spotify uploads, so like 24 hours after. Hopefully we'll have wrung all the views out of it. But